I can't have feelings all of a sudden. I can't be in space. And then when we talk about the layer of Black feminists and how it's just like, whoa, so now it makes it different when this is a white presenting person who's saying that to me. And it's like, I don't even know if you're aware of the layers that your comment alone brings. And also, right, that's not something I necessarily want to address with you or address in general. And you don't deserve that kind of time from me. Right? Yeah. But just like all of the things that happen with that. But I want to give you space.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I just think for me, it comes down to like how difficult it actually ends up becoming to function in these kind of circumstances. Because, you know, what am I to do when I can't express my feelings, when I'm not seen as my own person? All these projections are put on me. I have all this awareness of these intersectionalities inside of me and all of the different ways that they affect the world around me that a lot of people aren't up to date with and in awareness of, especially if they're not experiencing those things, especially being a Black queer woman. Like, my intersectionalities just continue to stack. And I'm mixed race. So in that sense, like, there's even more intersectionality there. And it's a lot to carry around when you're walking in a world that's numb and that's so quick to put those projections on each other and not see each other for the humanity that we each have, our individualized experiences. And like you talked about, the nuances in that, you know, we can dive deeper into and get to know each other even more, get to know the world even more. And so sometimes I feel just so overwhelmed by that, even just functioning in life, in day to day, online. You know, like, I find myself wanting to engage, and I have all these great, you know, things I want to post about that I think would be like inspiring to other people, that would really call to other folks' experiences, or that might just like spark an interesting conversation, you know? And I also agree that social media is not a good place for dialogue, but I think it's a really great place for sparking ideas and dreaming and like going down a certain, like, well, what if we did this? You know what I mean? So, but I have all these great ideas of how I want to interact, how I want to engage, even like what all the things I want to do, you know, all the impacts I want to make. And then it's just so much, because you put something out there and everyone comes after you. Everyone has something to say about it. Everyone has something to say about it. And then my experience can't just be my own experience. And so, I mean, even going back to the conversation about Beyonce, I think that's been one of the hardest things for me. Is like, as a Black woman, I do have a certain perspective of Beyonce. You know, like, I see myself in her in a way that I don't get to see very often. So there's that. And then there is the weight that everyone puts on her to be the one that everyone is being represented by, that makes it, for me, even more difficult to discuss, you know, my interpretation of her work, my connection with her, and my ideologies of how she sits within our history of time and music and people. And I think it is a conversation that should be able to be had. And I don't find that there are a lot of safe spaces to have that conversation.
And I think that, you know, one of the things that I start a lot of my classes with, especially classes on like sports, is this diagram called like how to be a fan of problematic things, right? Because I think that the thing that I find really important is that I want to give people space to be able to have that space to say, like, this is how I react to this. This is how I feel, right? But also understand that feelings and intentions also don't matter in terms of how it is impacting and intertwining with systems. And so part of when I'm talking to folks about like, okay, how to be fans of problematic things starts with giving yourself the grace and space to be happy or feel joy from things. And then also the space to receive sincere critique or criticism or whatever without trying to block it, and to understand that something that might give you joy or be a site of happiness or whatever can also be part of a larger system that you're complicit in. And we're all complicit in things in a variety of ways, which is hard. And I don't think it does anybody a thing to act like there's purity, to act like that's not true. And I think people make choices about what part of their complicity they're going to interrogate and change, and what that priority looks like, and what are the ways that you feel like you can't opt out of systems. I think a lot of us who occupy this country feel like there's limited ways we can opt out of being settler colonialists. Like, we were born into a settler colonial state. We can work, and many people do work, to undo that harm. But sometimes it feels so much bigger that it can be, you can just feel like you want to throw your hands up about it. And so I think that for me, it's one of those things where if you can hold all of that for yourself and really be clear about yourself, about what choices you're making, and fully understanding that, I think that that opens up a lot of pathways to not only conversation, but to action, and to ways to think about that. And I can give an example. When I was 18 and expecting Samari, and, you know, a lot of our village was so essential, and people came through with diapers and this and that. And one of the things that we received from extended family member on my husband's side was a Disney Vacation Club membership. Now, at the time, neither me or my husband had ever been to Disney, and it was a very kind of foreign idea or life. And also, we were like on food stamps, and like couldn't even think about, like, do we have enough money to like make it from Temple to our like studio apartment? Fuck going to Orlando. Like, what? But as we were able to build a little bit, you know, there was opportunities for us to be like, oh, we can go, because all of a sudden this is accessible to us that it wouldn't otherwise be. And one of those things that I figured out for us was that the actual cruising was the first time for a lot of us in my family that we actually felt completely relaxed. And it's because of the infrastructures of care on the ship, in which that they literally watch your kids, and you can also have, like, you don't come back and need a vacation from your vacation because you're still parenting. And there was a way of reprieve. And so for me, it was one of these things where it's like, listen, this is one of the ways that vacationing has all of a sudden become accessible to us. And I want to hold the fact that we are working multiple jobs, and we are broken down, and we are in desperate need of rest, and all of these things. And here's an avenue for us to do that. And also acknowledging that whether we're coming out of pocket for it or not, we are still within a system that is relying on cheap labor from under-resourced countries, and it's relying on a certain sense of empire. It's relying on porting in ships, where porting in docks where entire economies are built around tourism, right? And taking all of that knowledge and saying, all right, these are all the things I know to be true. What are my decisions? What can I do from my vantage point? And so we have chosen to cruise. We also spend a great deal of time talking, both with our children, about empire while we do it. We spend a great deal of time in conversation with the crew, and about their families, and about their experiences, and their labor conditions and whatnot. We take the resources we have and make sure we leave really equitable tips. And and we don't simply glorify it in a sense of like, this is good for us, because I understanding that what's good for me in this moment is also harmful to others in that same moment. And I think that that is also true with things. And like, so that's kind of, you know, how the same way that I approach Black is King, right? Is like, what are the things that this does for me and how does this bring me joy, right? And how does acknowledging that, as you were saying, Kinga, how does the vaulting of like one individual align the way the system is working to create conditions so there can only be one? And what is the logic of that? Like, what is the formula that you have to follow to be a performer of her caliber, or to be a Black politician, or to be all of these things? And to be able to say that formula is grounded in anti-Blackness, that formula is misogynistic, that formula is all of these things and structures that we did not create, but it's still there. And so then if we know that formula is creating the conditions of the game that the people are playing, what does it then mean to support somebody who's played the game that way? Is that enabling the system? Are there ways to support that person while critiquing the system and trying to find pathways for a new one? And people fall different lines. There are some people who, where they are, their philosophy is any engagement with it is enabling. And the space they are in are simply to find other avenues and tear a system down. There's other people who are like, listen, the system's above me. I can't change it. I'm just going to do what I can within it, and that's going to be it. And then there's people where I consider myself who feels kind of hybrid, who feels like these are things that are never going to be solved in my lifetime. And so for me, it's like a all hands on deck approach. So if you want to be in the master's house using the tools and doing like that, do it. If you want to be mobilizing from the outside, do it. There's going to be points where your interests converge and all of a sudden you're going to have moments where you can build together. And then sometimes you're not going to be building together. You're not going to be working towards the same thing. You're going to be in a dialogue that is not a dialogue based in agreement. And to me, that I am okay for me living in that space, because I'm happy to be in dialogue with somebody who says, well, these are what was harmed by it. Because maybe for in that moment, I will feel like the harm outweighs any potential joy I could get. And those are those personal choices. So that's why I said at the top, where I think it's really important to talk about feelings and intentions and all of those things, and also understand that they're not just kind of benign things that even if you're acting out of a feeling or intention, whatever, you can still be unintentionally or not enabling harm in other ways. And that is the messiness that I think we occupy. And that is that kind of murky, gritty chaos that I'm interested in, and I want to sit in and seep through. And that to me is the space where dialogue and transformation happens, in the weeds, in the muck, in the mud. So that's, Black is King, I think, was a great example of that, for multiple reasons. And you're back. Ask your brother. He's capable. Okay, bye-bye. So yeah, I think Black is King is a great example, right? Like, for reasons you stated, I think that there's immense joy that a lot of people took from it. I think that I saw so many things that were just brimming to the top of joy of seeing creatives from the continent like Shatawale, like on this platform, on the stage, from having creative directors, from having the visualizations to a song like Brown Skin Girl, which means so much to so many people who never have seen their dark skin beauty celebrated and amplified in that way on that type of platform. And I think that, any discussion that cannot also hold and give space to that joy is not a discussion that I feel is complete, because it's absolutely an important component of it. And then of course you can start to engage with other dialogues that were happening around it.
Yeah. And I think that part of like the difficulty again that comes from me is that like there is no space from my experience to critique Beyonce because people come for you. And so I've had a difficult time enjoying anything that comes from her for a long time because I feel like I can't genuinely react to whatever it is that she's putting out there.
And this is what I mean by that projection, right? Like, because then even with what you're saying, a lot of that is based on beyond what she's putting out, but all the reaction to it. And that is certainly the exhausting part for me too. And so when I say like, where does she stop and this symbolic kind of politics begin? That's what I mean. And like, I mean, I have like, you know, Michael's a contrarian and I joke with him about that, but he'll be like, I think he's functionally indifferent to her or whatever. But somebody was saying something and he'll be like, oh, I'm not a fan of it. And like, I feel like, and I said to him, I was like, it's so funny to me that you like go out of your way to say that, because I feel like the only reason you go out of way to say that is because you don't like how Stanish the rest of like the love is. And so you're trying to distinguish yourself by saying like, I'm not like this. And I was like, but is it accurate to say you're not a fan? Like you don't dislike it, like you're functionally indifferent. So like, is there, you know, or rather I would say he was saying like, I don't like, and I was like, but is it that you don't like her, or that you're just like not a fan on that like you're just indifferent, which is different than dislike?
And I think that's the piece, again, that's the piece that I'm talking about, is that how often can we even go in, and I think again that's what you were talking about earlier when you're saying the nuanced conversation and us actually being able to have the conversation of what it is that we're even talking about, the details of the matter in the beginning, in the first point. Because how often are we even able to go into an actual reflection of what is it that we are enjoying and what it is that we aren't? I mean, I'm fortunate to have these conversations with DW all the time. So I am like, I know that I can get down to Beyonce's music, some of it, and then some of it, when I especially watch her art as a whole piece, I'm not that much of a I'm not very fond of it for a lot of different reasons. And I'm an artist, so I could have a conversation all day with you about the details of why I like this or why I don't like this, or if I agree with certain things that she's doing and I don't agree with other things that she's doing. But these are the conversations I have behind closed doors. Yeah. And that's the part where you were also mentioning earlier, that we stop ourselves from even having these conversations. Even now, even in this conversation we're having right now, I've found myself stop myself a million times of saying like, okay, well, I'm not going to say this, or I'm only going to say a little bit about this, because you know, it's ingrained in me. It's not, right. It's barely even a choice anymore. It's like, right. I didn't even notice half the time I was doing it until you mentioned it. And I was like, wow, I just did that like 7 times.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I wanted to actually say to that, also to give framing for people who may not be familiar with Kinga and I, as far as our interdisciplinary artistry. It's like we've right. been doing this for like, I don't know, forever, right? So, and specifically, Kinga's been in traditional and cultural and traditional dances, right? And that is her really where a lot of her work is in, and also her work is in hip hop theater, right? And then the discovery of, we've been doing so much artistry that as artists, when we look at the content, it's like, for me, it's a whole nother conversation in the essence of knowing the history of that particular artist. When we talk about Beyonce and the way that they've interacted with other people's artistry, someone like me who doesn't have the platform that Beyonce has, and the way that people like me have been historically treated by Beyonce, right? And so we can't always say, and how that's been argued and disputed and downplayed, and the thoughts. And so even just going into that, and then having the conversation in a larger spectrum, with when we talk about the Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, those kind of conversations. So the babies.
I was like,
how she muted it. It was like, hold on, I need to.
Hold on.
You know, when you talk about the patience,
Yes.
the patience. All right, the patience is at another level right now.
I try to stay so.
Go charge it.
I try to stay calm because I'm like.
So then go use it if it's charged, baby. Yes, you can. Where are they? Are they in the den? Oh, is that Daddy? Yep, go talk to him. Okay, bye-bye. Close the door, close the door, close the door. Thank you.
We were just talking about that level of how we want to be serious so you can handle your business,
right.
But then also not to laugh, but also the patience when you talked about earlier, the patience the levels, and where it's like creeping away. It's creeping in. But I wanted to, so we were speaking to that, and it's deep, and it goes many different layers and levels, and then how knowing that we can have so many conversations about this, right? And but also I wanted to ask, what do we feel like we're taking away? Like if we walked away with something, because you're talking about dialogue and how we offer a lot of things when we're in dialogue, and that's part of the process. If there's anything that you feel like, or you think that people can walk away that may be able to aid them in having dialogues.
Yeah.
Right? What would that be?
I think for me, it's like learning how to be an active listener, giving yourself space to really think of things. Like sometimes I think in dialogue, we've kind of been conditioned to be like, you talk, then I talk, then you talk, and I talk. And sometimes because of that flow, because of that pattern and that cadence, when it shifts back to you to talk, you're saying words, but you haven't even had the time to process. People process things at very different speeds, you know? And like I said, sometimes you need to ruminate on it more. And so I'd say when I'm thinking about this, I'm saying, first and foremost, like I think taking stock of the ways you want to further the conversation, or I'm a big fan of like reading, obviously. So I'm like, was there something that piqued my interest? And I don't want to necessarily go back to that person and be like, and put the labor on them to be like, you said this, now teach me all of this. Because if that space and time has stopped, if that dialogue has stopped, then you assume some of that. So what can you do? What work can you do to look for sources, to read books, to whatever? And then maybe come back to the table and say, hey, can I invite you back to the conversation about this? Because like, this is where I'm at, or whatever. And I think what kind of what you're saying I can use as a real example. A few years ago, I was in New Orleans at a conference with one of my dear friends who husband is the lead of the band Antibalas, which is an Afrobeat band, and has they did the music for Fela for when it was on Broadway and stuff like that. And if you haven't checked them out, check them out, they're amazing. Anyhow, so his relationship with like actual people on the ground, producers, artists, whatever, who have worked and engaged with Beyonce, Big B Beyonce corporate, like all of her people too, right? And had varying experiences. And so I think this was around maybe Lemon, I can't remember. But this is one of those times where we were having a discussion and she was talking a lot about what it felt like to watch artistically Afrobeat artists who haven't been able to find consistent support, resources, spaces, platforms, right? To watch then artists like her with those resources and platforms envelope that art form in and feel like you're on the sidelines, even if a few people within that artistic community are put on because of it, right? And I'm seeing it happen right now. The WNBA ratings are going up, and with sports being in the condition they are, there's a lot of people who are suddenly like, I'm gonna write columns about this in the New York Times and stuff like that. And there is a whole bunch of people who've been covering the WNBA for years with a fraction of the resources, who are kind of sitting here like, but we said that, and like, you're getting a lot of shine for doing half as much engagement, right? And I think that those are all always really hard spots to be in. But I think like if you're presenting a conversation like that as an example of what I'm saying, you can ruminate on things from the dialogue, right? For me in that conversation with Court, it was like, well, I really want to think about this. I want to learn more about Afrobeat in terms of like the functional artistic community, right? I want to learn more about, like, it drove me to like want to look up production credits, right? To think concretely about this, and to be able to hold multiple things at once, right? Just the same way that I'm really hyped for all of the great people of color in Hamilton whose careers have literally been changed and defined by that role, while still saying things like, well, what I'm not happy about is that the influence that the production gave Lynn, but also Lewis, his father, and the way that he used that to like help pass Promesa on the island of Puerto Rico, which is just settling, just like awful, giving more government control, a government control board that is furthering settler colonialism and disaster capitalism in really, really terrible ways. And a lot of that was made possible by the success of the same production. And so being able to say, I really am unhappy about the effects of that. I'm also really pleased about the individual successes that have been built off of that, and not understanding them as individual successes, but rather what does that individual success open up space for and give space to? And then what is the ripple effects in both positive and negative ways? And my daughter was played Angelica Schuyler in a local Camp Hamilton production, and the fact that she could play a role, there's so few roles in kind of the canon of American theater that are naturally written for a Black woman or a Black girl like my daughter to be slotted into. That, like, right now she's Dorothy in Wizard of Oz, and even that is like, oh, we are being diverse in casting, and what is it like to like have a role that's like, no, like this was always going to be what it was. And also knowing, like, you're talking about theater in a predominantly white area, like, and I think I've joked with you before, like, let's be real, we're in this sticky position where we're like, absolutely we want more diverse productions, but like, do we really want to sit through Dreamgirls with all these white kids playing? No, I don't want to see that. They did Once on This Island, and even that was like, and so I think that is what I'm talking about. So in those conversations, figuring out those complexities and like pulling the thread that you want to continue, if you're continued in investing sincerely in furthering that, even if it's for yourself. And I think following up with reading previous dialogue, but also making sure you're not putting that labor back to say, hey, you said this, give me all your labor to explain this to me. You better be bringing something back to the table yourself. And I think that is a really, really big thing. And then also figuring out kind of a clear goal. Is your goal to understand more about that person and their individual approach to it? Is it to understand more about the content, the subject that you're talking about? Those are very different aims. If you're going into a discussion to understand more about the person you're talking to, then what you're asking about and what you're searching for in the dialogue, what you're following up about, is about their process, their thoughts, their experience that led them to have that positionality. If it's about the actual content in hand, it's a very different conversation. And so being clear with yourself about what goals, doing it, and then also figuring out what that space looks like for you. Like I said, I don't engage in these dialogues a lot of times, certainly not on Facebook, right? Twitter is more of like a professional space for me. And so I engage in certain things there. And even like you said, I'm constantly censoring myself. I'm making a calculation about if I do this. I wrote a piece following the death of Kobe Bryant. That was the hardest piece I've ever written in my entire life. I cried throughout writing it. I have lots of feelings. And I literally wrote about the incoherence of all those feelings. And yet, the harm that came out of not wanting to deal with that incoherence during his life. And I had to make a calculation that writing this down and putting it out on the platform that I had with the New Republic was also fully preparing myself for a complete disruption of my life, because I knew I would get hate mail. I knew I would get hateful DMs. I knew, and I did. And I also got really positive reactions as well, but they don't act as a balm to some of the nastiness that is sent to you. And so that calculation is real, where you're like, am I able to have this dialogue safely for my mental and physical health in this space? And so sometimes it's about finding, even if it's one person. And I think that's kind of what we did when you talked about at the beginning, King, like holding back. I think what we end up, how it ends up manifesting is doing a dance where you kind of put out a feeler to see, did this person react the same way? Or is this person thinking the same thing? Or you kind of watch their Instagram. You kind of see like, you know, who's where I'm at. And I think that that's certainly one of the ways we try to like ensure our safety in these conversations. And I would say the only other thing that I would recommend is, instead of doing that reproach, which is often in reaction, something has already happened and you're kind of searching for people who are kind of having reactions like you are, whether you're doing that through likes or whatever. But what does it look like if we're not having reactive dialogue, but rather intentional ones? So seeking out people like we're doing right now, saying, hey, I vibe with you. We don't agree on everything. We have very different positionalities. We have things that we are very similar on, and we have differences. We have, you know, all of these things. But what we absolutely do have is trust and love and a foundation on which to have these talks. And so the other thing I would say about that is, if you're really interested in having dialogues on a number of issues, is finding those people in those places that you feel safe already in, and starting them, having them there, whether it's a group chat, whether it's in person. And those people might change. When I'm talking about, I have, and it's also about building relationships within that. Like I have great colleagues who I have built tremendous relationships with, who have been the place where I talk about issues of gender expression. And it is also where I've had such growth and evolution through being able to have a space where I can also say, hey, I have this question, and knowing that it's being received in good faith and that it's actually from a place of curiosity. And I think that that to me is the difference.
Yes. Yes.
Do you want to add anything? Do I want to add to the takeaway?
Yeah, well, I was thinking to myself,
to what she just said.
Yeah, go for it. Saying. No, I was just thinking. I was saying, I love how you put that, of being in spaces where you trust people to have that dialogue. Because even when we're sitting here, the feeling of being held. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about the article that you were writing about Kobe Bryant, and knowing like, I absolutely love Kobe Bryant. I loved him. Right. So did I not love him? And I cried so much over that whole entire tragedy. And then I also cried for all of the things that went unsaid, and all of the conversations that will never be had, and all of the people that have been harmed that may have never been able to talk about that. right? So it was just all of these things that were happening. And so when I read the article, I totally got it. The humanity, understanding the humanity of people, of that we have all of these different places that we can be in life. And we should be able to have these conversations, because Beyonce, to me, is having the conversation about Beyonce is having the conversation about Kobe Bryant, right? And then why does it have to be this attack? Feel your feelings and be okay with that. Also know that other people have feelings around this, and that even when we celebrate somebody, it could mean a trigger and a trauma for somebody else.
Yeah.
And to be able to know that those can be held, those two things can be held, and it doesn't have to be Rihanna or Beyonce.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be Kobe or LeBron, right? It doesn't have to be those things, but we are creating those competing notions because of how we embrace the violent culture that we're in general. And so I just wanted to really speak to say, like, I appreciate you for the things that you bring up.
Yeah.
I appreciate your braveness and your courage. And I wanted to say that out loud to you as you were talking about these topics in general, just to acknowledge that these things can be held. And that as people, we need to free up our mind space in order to create those conversations so we can move forward and have these healthy dialogues and have people with tenderness and gentleness.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes what happens within it is you realize all of these ways that it enhances you and enhances your relationships by doing that, right? And when I was younger, this was really important because I felt very isolated, because I was adopted and had, white lesbian moms and doing this. And sometimes looking around, and I'm like, I'm looking for somebody exactly like me. And that's not actually what I needed. But all of a sudden I found, like, my best friend, Thelma, like, she's mixed, her mom was white. And all of a sudden we were like able to relate about things around what it meant to have white moms, right? And then we couldn't relate around the fact that, like, she also knew people who were biologically connected to her, right? And those are the ways where you're like, oh, I can feed pieces of myself through this conversation that I didn't expect to have, because I was trying to look for like an exact like puzzle piece where I just like slid into. And that's not the picture we're painting here. But then also being able to tell the people that you love moments that have hurt is part of that process. And I think that that is so necessary and so, such a moment of growth when you're able to do that, to say, what did we, when Samari was born, and so many people were like, oh, she looks just like Mike. And I was like, yeah, she did. And she does. But in that moment, it was very hard because that was the first biological person I had ever seen. You know what I mean? And it was hard for me to say, like, or deal with that and like not process it. And around that time, I had a group of adult adoptees, and that was the place that I did a lot of that, right? And there's going to be spaces you move in and out of, because that space was really helpful for me during that moment, during reunion, whatever. And then I think it was around South Carolina. I think it was around, there was some spectacle, Black Death, that happened. And a lot of the Black adoptees in that group, we had to leave because we were like, it didn't serve us in that way. It wasn't holding us in that way anymore. And I think that knowing when you need to pull back is the other piece of that. And for me, it's an ongoing process. And I can't say enough, like, read, engage, and listen. There's so much information, sometimes information overload. But, I think to me, it's the difference between saying like, hey, it's strange for me that like my people that I've known who I grew up with don't know my biological family. But sometimes what that manifests in is that like they don't care to know, like they don't know how to treat it. Mm-hmm. And so then I have to say, like, listen, instead of having the only engagement be either to not talk about them or to just say, I don't like it when I feel like you're not asking, or you don't know what to say, or you don't know how to hold this. Instead saying, what does it make you feel like when I'm talking about my sister or my brothers or my mom or my dad? Like, what does it invoke in you that you're reacting in this way? And that is, questions can change the tone or the scope of a conversation so fast. And I think that a lot of what we're kind of talking about is all the ways that we shy away from some of these things in order to protect ourselves. And hopefully, you know, some of the stuff that we're talking about are ways to lean in and call in gently and to gather and to engage in a laying of hands. And then the next part of that, right, is to use these spaces, use these dialogues as generative spaces, that tangible, actionable steps are the next part of that, whatever that looks like, whether it's you're trying to reform an institution, whether it's you're trying to heal, whatever it is finding where on the bedrock of that dialogue you might build.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
anything you gotta add? Because
Amira said it all.
I feel like on that note,
Amira said it all.
We can walk away. I wanted to do a checkout.
Yeah.
For the three of us. And before I do the checkout, I wanted to ask 2 books.
Oh, yeah.
2 books that you would give people to read. 2 books that you would give them to read with this moment to be able to enhance even their understanding of anything we talked about today. Yeah. What would those books be?
First and foremost, it would be Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. You might see a lot of press about her new book, Cast, but I really encourage everybody to do Warmth of Other Suns. She's a journalist. It's a work of historical brilliance. It follows the Great Migration, but really in its retelling is walking through a very comprehensive story of Black life in this country from the beginning of the 20th century. And it is told in vivid detail. It keeps people, humanity at the center of it. It's very accessible. It's on Audible and all of that. And to me, it is, it can be a hard read, certainly, but I also think that it is one that plants a lot of seeds for further exploration because of how expansive it is. And so definitely Warmth of Other Suns is one of my big go-tos. In terms of another book, I think I would say, it's a good question. There's so many good books. There's so many good books. It's so hard for a historian. I would also like kind of invert that and be like, you don't need to run headfirst into reading White Fragility. You don't need to do it. You don't even need to do How to Be an Anti-Racist. Oftentimes, some of the books that are included or plotted are books that tend to make people feel good about dealing with some of the conversations we have that aren't, it's not a warm and fuzzy feeling. So like Warmth of Other Suns is not, you're not going to be like, this is so joyous, I feel better about myself, right? It's not going to hold you, it's going to push you. And like, that's what I like about Warmth of Other Suns a lot. I guess I would say the other thing I would invite people to read for this moment, I would read sources at their core. I would go read Toni Morrison. I would read James Baldwin, right? I would expand your corpus of knowledge and engagement. I would read something that makes you feel good. I love The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. And it's random and it's in Swedish and it's in English, but it's in Sweden. And yeah, it brings me a lot of joy, right? And so that's kind of what I would say. So Warmth of Other Suns, and some classics and something that makes you feel good too. And then if you need a podcast instead, I think there's a lot out there, a lot of work that is being done. Code Switch is always great. My friends over at Throughline are doing tremendous work. And so I think that you also have to find a medium that works for you. And I think that is if you want to listen to something instead of jumping into a book, I would say Throughline is one of my favorite things out there. Some of the work they're doing is absolutely phenomenal on so many different topics. Is great, a great place to start.
Awesome. All right, we're gonna wrap with one word. One word you would give, a gift that we can walk away with, and what I mean by a gift, we're gonna wrap it to one word. One gift we're giving to each other. And so when I think about this, a practitioner gave me this gift of being able to share this as well, is that something that I wish for you, something I wish for you to take with you that may be able to carry you into whatever journey that you may be going into. And if I could put that into one word, and I would give that to you, right? So I'm going to give an example. I'm going to think really hard on it, and I'm going to pass my word to Kinga, and maybe Kinga, you can pass to Amira. Amira, pass back, or whichever way.
We're doing one word or multiple?
We're doing one word that we're passing to each other. Okay. So actually, you know what? Let me think of my word.
I have my word.
Why don't you go? Okay. Why don't you go and you pass it to whomever?
Okay, my word is ease.
My word is thrive.
Courage.
Thank you.
Yo, thank you, Amira, for coming on and having this real deep, dope, important conversation.
Thank y'all for having me.